Let's talk about The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I did this as a short buddy read just over the new year on my Discord group. We're moving on to reading Gene Wolfe's Fifth Head of Cerberus for the next couple of months. So I actually used to have an individual volume of Time Machine, and I think I donated it to something because I had this, which is a nice bind up. The Time Machine is about his earliest sci-fi. I think he'd written some other stuff beforehand. As in, I think he'd written some kind of comedy novels and stuff. And it's either his most famous or his second most famous after War of the Worlds in terms of his stories. Wells as a fiction writer or whatever is, well, in general as a writer really, is most interesting in his early career during a period of when writing about the real world and with no speculative elements. It's sort of pathos-laden and thoughtful comedy, and in the speculative, it's, as I think the introduction to this says, basically where his ideas and his artistic vision drive the art rather than his opinion drives the art. In his preface, he basically says he actually thinks it's better once he starts just having his opinion drive his art, and it's very much more didactic. But I think the general opinion is correct about that. And these stories that are in here, Time Machine, Island of Dr. Moreau, Invisible Man, First Men in the Moon, Food of the Gods, In the Days of the Comet, and The War of the Worlds are a very good example of that, that experience. The Time Machine is, none of them are long, by the way. It's 60 pages in a fairly medium-sized, small to medium text. The Time Machine is about a guy comes back, apparently from having time travel, and he says to his friends, I need to tell you what happened. And then there's a degree of a flashback. Oh, well, he had said about this time machine he had. He shows the principle with a miniature time machine. This is just the very beginning. And then he tells the story of going back in time, in the main time machine. And this is from the perspective of one hero, presumably, essentially H.G. Wells. And there are others. There's a newspaper man, there's a medical man. At this dinner club that the time traveller, as he's called, hosts, presumably only retrospectively called the Time Traveller because of course he hadn't before. And there's a lot to like about it. I enjoyed it a lot. I think as a basic early sci-fi story that's very easy to kind of get into and to enjoy, everyone should read it. That was some dice, by the way. Everyone should read it. I think it's the speculation, the idea of, look, we're not going to create a time machine, but what if there was a way to travel in a fourth dimension? This is classic. Time is a fourth dimension. And so that's the discussion. What would happen if you could travel in the fourth dimension? And he gets a machine to do that, and then he goes forward. And the key thing, because this is the heart of the story, is he goes forward to a time where humanity seems to have radically changed. And he's basically in where would be London, the Thames Valley. And it's a different kind of place, and the people he meets there are very different to what he'd expect. And there's a sort of interesting interplay here of Darwinianism and speculation about the nature of human society in the future and how politics will affect it or won't, and lots of things like this. And it's something where reading it, you don't come away, though you understand he believes in X, Y, and Z, you don't come away thinking he has the right answer or there's something simple here, but rather he's pondering what is the human spirit like. It's a more universal thing than, rather than being utopia or dystopia, which he later wrote, it's much more interested in what are humans actually like, and it's very insightful about that, very touching at points, very effective as well, in terms of there's lots of quite good kind of like images and pictures. And I think, in fact, the time traveller as a character is a surprisingly, for an early work by a guy who actually mostly didn't think of himself as a speculative fiction writer later on, in lots of ways, but who we obviously mostly see like that. I think there is a rounded character. It's also, by the way, you don't necessarily expect an 1895 or whatever, an 1892 story to have that sort of depth of character within the genre, because there's a very different thing going on in a lot of early sci-fi and fantasy. Character is very much secondary to action, concept, things like that. Not always, but often. And here the time traveller is quite a distinctive character, as are one or two of the other characters you meet, but particularly the time traveller. And it's quite short, so he's packing a lot of plot and a lot of idea and a lot of character stuff, sometimes quite subtly into, 60 pages in my edition, slightly more in most paperbacks you'll get. There's the one caveat is that his style is mostly good, but occasionally there's just a little bit of, I guess, pomposity or circumlocution in it, which is, you read in my edition where I've got this preface from him, is much more obvious later on. But it's interesting because his style wobbles between the two. There is at points, an Orwellianly, in the proper sense, direct language. This point, Orwell on the English language, the idea of not using excess words, summing things up directly. He's very good at that, quite often. And I think I just noticed that because it jarred, because I think this is so fun and so quick. And then I was like, oh, okay, wait a second. Okay, I need to reread that, or how does that, okay, that connects to that this way. It also, and this is sort of generally the case with, I think, with his stories, he doesn't do, pardon me, bless me, conclusions particularly well. By that I don't mean this terrible ending, but and in fact there's an ending lots of people like in this, but I think you do find that he kind of has come to the conclusion of what he wants to do. And he doesn't necessarily want to resolve plots in the way that you and I might be interested. That's okay, Gene Wolfe and his Ring ending has come to mind. But I think it's partly because for Wells, the idea has run its course and now it's over. But on the whole, absolute classic. Read it, you'll enjoy it, I think. And if you have read it, tell me what you think in the comments, or tell me your other favourite Wells stories. Till next time.